So we're going to call this meeting to order. This is the City of Encinitas Equity Committee, and it's Tuesday, October 19, 2021 at 4 p.m. And we are going to the first agenda item, which is public comment. We have one public commenter, Jerry Zadomka, so go ahead, Jerry.
Yes, my name is Jerry Zadomka. I live in Cardiff by the Sea. I understand that $35,000 was allocated for the Equity Committee. In an earlier meeting, the consultant said there was only enough money for 2 more meetings. We're at least 2 meetings past that. Are the consultants working for free, or has the funding been increased? Perhaps the consultant can clarify. I was perplexed by some of the comments last month. Kelly Hinsey said that, quote, hard topic to engage in. Marlon asked, who does the work? And wondered about the execution. Ross said that there are already groups doing the work and suggested ceding it to others. Is there any progress being made? It appears the group is chasing a ghost in a quixotic quest to a utopia, and a fundamental misreading of human nature is taking place. I know that certain meetings of this group make accusations of white racism on social media. For the record, I spent 2 years as a Peace Corps volunteer in Nigeria. For half that time, I was the only white person in a rural boarding school, with all students and staff being black. The other year, a second white volunteer served with me. Also, for 29 years, I worked in Mexico as an agricultural consultant. Most of the time, I was the only white person and native English speaker. Afortunadamente, podía hablar español.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. So let's move to item number 3, which is the Mobile Crisis Response Team update.
Okay.
I think that's Robin.
Yeah. How much time do I have, Nicole?
We had about 10 minutes or so,
Okay,
but we've
that
got
should be
some
great.
flex in the agenda.
So I have good news to share, though. I have been appointed as the District 3 representative to the Behavioral Health Advisory Board for the county.
Awesome.
This was passed, voted on today, I guess. It was a consent. So I have a pipeline now, and I've been attending the Behavioral Health Advisory Board meetings for, this is a county organization, and their role is to advise the behavioral health services for the county. And so I've been involved in that because we really were interested. This is a group I'm involved with, which is part of the Racial Justice Coalition. It's called the Community Oversight Law Enforcement Group. And we've been zeroing in on the MCRT. That's been for quite a few, probably 9 or 10 months now, we've been focusing on that. And along with the work we've been doing in E4E on the same, we've come to some conclusions about what needs to be done at the county level to make this a successful program. So we had a lot of questions, and we developed a document, our group, and we met with all of the supervisors individually. So we met with all 5 we met with some staff people. We met with Nora Vargas, with Tara, and with Jim Desmond, and then we met with the staffers for the other 2, for Anderson and Fletcher. No, actually we met with Fletcher for an hour. He gave us a lot of time. So we're really pleased with that. And this is the document that I have here that I'm going to sort of go over very quickly, is what we've sent a summary to all the supervisors, so they know where we stand and where we're going to push. And now in my role as part of, and I've been attending the part of the Behavioral Health Advisory Board that I could do as a lay person was attend the Criminal Justice Work Group, which has been focusing on getting mentally ill and substance abuse folks who are just picked up because of those reasons out of jail. And if you have time to watch the Board of Supervisors or read what Tara, there was an article in the paper today in the UT about what she was recommending. I'm so grateful that we have her as a supervisor. She's amazing. you know, and she's really progressive in her policies, and so that's really a great thing. But this is what we presented, and I'm just gonna go over it real quickly. So we had a lot of questions, because we felt like this program that they've been developing for a really long time now, the MCRT's been in the works for 16 months, 20 months, you know, 2 years in the works, and they're rolling it out. You know, we know the pilot program started up here in North County, and then they've just rolled out the South Bay. They identified the South Bay area as the next area that really needed attention. And most of the people in the South Bay, well, majority are Latino, but there's Filipino, there's many different ethnic groups in South Bay. So they have the added issues of many different languages, probably more so than in North County coastal area. And so we had a lot of concerns about how they were rolling this out. Are they giving it enough money? Are they giving it enough attention? Do they have a plan to follow through? You know, once someone calls in and gets services, what happens then? I mean, do they just, okay, yeah, we got you to the crisis stabilization unit, which there's 2 of them just opened up in North County, and now what happens? Where do they go after that? Are there funds being allocated for immediate service? Because if you have somebody who comes out of a crisis stabilization unit, if you send them back to the street, then you have that recidivism going back and forth. So the questions that we have for them, which were totally answered, we also met with Luke Bergman, who's the Director of Behavioral Health Services for the county. And he's a really nice man. He's got a lot of good experience, and he's a politician, so we heard the political line from him about how wonderful the program is and going to be, but I don't think they really answered our questions. So the first one had to do with the 911 call. So in North County, I think you all maybe heard from Marlon, is that folks would need to call the Access and Crisis Line. And the Access and Crisis Line has been in existence for many, many years. And I'm a clinician up in North County. I'm a clinical social worker. And the Access and Crisis Line is great. They know how to do assessments. They're professionals. And they send people, they triage them someplace. You know. So right now, the only access for North County, the pilot program, which is no longer a pilot, is for people to call the Access and Crisis Line. It does not involve the police, so it doesn't go through 911 dispatch. The problem with that is that when somebody's having a mental health crisis, you're going to call the police because you need some immediate help. You don't know what to do. If you're, what's typical in the mental health field, we see a lot of 17, 18, 19-year-olds go off to college and they have their first psychotic break. And if you have a young person in your family who's going through that, they may be tearing up the house. You've never seen this behavior before. It comes out of nowhere. Could be exacerbated by drug use, often is. And you call the police. So the police come. The choice is you're going to have a PERT team, the Psychiatric Emergency Response Team. Always comes, it's a clinician, but they always come with a cop with a gun. And that can lead to a tragedy. Suicide by cop, or somebody losing control with the police and ending up in jail. So then you have people going to jail in a worse situation than they could possibly be in an outpatient, because once you're in jail, the stress of being in jail, along with you're already having a psychotic break, and you're being treated by maybe people who don't have the experience to treat in a situation that's already confining with real criminals, not somebody who's having a psychotic break, but maybe some people who are real criminals. It's a very bad situation. So the first thing about the rollout is you have to have 911 dispatch involved for it to be effective. But the dispatchers have to be trained effectively. If they're not trained to triage to the right place, we're going to be in the same situation. So that's the first question we have. How are you training your dispatchers? Who is training the dispatchers? It took us a long time to find out who's training the dispatchers, but it turns out that a local organization called Telecare got the contract for the rest of the county. So they got a contract for 5 different programs, and they're doing the training of the dispatchers. So I don't know if that's good or bad, but I'm just telling you that's who's doing it. And they are trained mental health professionals.
Has the training started?
That's a good question. They've been working on MOUs with the various police departments. I think we've talked about this for 16 months now. They're getting them signed. Supposedly, the last time when we met with Lou Berkman, he said we just signed with National City, because there's so many police entities in San Diego County. You have the sheriffs, you have this San Diego Police Department, and all the individual police departments all over the county. So you have a lot of people, including the Highway Patrol and the Harbor Patrol. You would have never thought that they'd be involved. I think the military at some point has to be involved and looped in, because they have some kind of central system that they use, that they share resources, etc. So we're talking about a very complicated picture. And there has to be MOUs with each agency, so it's a lot. We were not yet able to see the MOUs, but that's coming down the line, that we've requested to see it. And the Behavioral Health Advisory Board Criminal Justice Group has requested to see this. So that's the first piece of it. The second is data. And this is something that Tara is very interested in, is data. I mean, this is one of her main areas of focus. And we want to know pre and post how people are being helped, if they're being helped, where they're being referred to. And today at the Board of Supervisors, and I'm pretty positive it passed, but I had to, after 4 hours of listening in and no resolution, I don't know. We'll know tomorrow when it comes out in the newspaper. But, so the question has to do is, how do you find out if the program's successful? How do you measure what happens once a call is made? How long does it take for the dispatchers to dispatch the MCRT? How often are they dispatching the MCRT versus the PERT team versus just 2 cops with a gun, or 5 police cars? So there's a lot of data that needs to be looked at. And so then also, how many calls are coming through the Access and Crisis line, and how many calls are coming through 911? My glasses are fogging up this mask. Sorry, I'll try to read without it. And then, anyway, a lot of very specific details on data, on how the services are being used, and where people are going, and if they're getting treatment afterwards, because that's the most important component. One thing that was said at the meeting, and Tara did a whole presentation, what they were talking about is homelessness, and how many people who are in jail with mental health problems are homeless. And the guy from one of the big programs for homeless, he said that when they do the overnight homeless count, which we do here in Encinitas, they didn't count the people who are homeless who are in jail. And they say, estimates 27% of people who are in jail are homeless. Were homeless before they were incarcerated.
You said they don't count them?
They don't count them in that homeless count. So that skews the data quite a bit, because you're not counting that. So that was pretty big.
Robin, I'm just going to do a quick time check
Oh,
on you.
I'm sorry, I'll speed up. Just 5 more minutes?
Yep.
Okay. So then the oversight, relationship of the MCRT with law enforcement, probation, behavioral health services, the MOUs, protocols, dispatch training, and standardization and referral. Who is going to oversight all of this? So it should be the Behavioral Health Advisory Board and Behavioral Health Services. And that's something that has to be worked out. And then one of the things that we asked was, can samples of recordings of 5150 calls be reviewed to see what questions are being asked? So far nobody's released that data. Dave Myers, who's a former sheriff, he said that you can request those through the process of public records requests. Then not necessarily the sheriff's not gonna give it to you, or the police department. So. And then the proactive planning for resource reallocation, and that was something that also came up before the Board of Supervisors today. That was the second piece of Tara's legislation, or her proposal. One was the data collection and analysis and the hiring of a consultant, and the second is allocation of money so that people can get immediate treatment rather than being taken to jail. So that's basically it. That's my presentation.
So they did allocate money, or they're going to, or?
Well, that's it. It'll come up for the budget for next year is the reallocation of money. They just put it forward today. That was the second piece of her proposal, was to make sure there's community-based resources so that anybody who wants treatment can get into treatment immediately with no delay, which is a big problem in this county.
So basically, the summary of what you said is that they're working on it, and things are improving.
Yes.
There's a lot of work to do.
Yes.
But there seems to be a good focus on it, and you're trying to help by asking the right questions from the outside to try to make sure that there aren't corners being cut.
Yeah, and I think that it's a complicated program. It's a lot of people. The county has over 3 million people, and you know, what they call the penetration rate of mental health services is about 10% of the population use mental health services in general, and it's a smaller percentage that are going to need crisis help. But still, if that makes up a high percentage of people who are in jails, for example, just one piece of data was that it cost $81,000 to house someone in jail for a year, as opposed to $32,000 for a residential treatment program. So when you look at the cost of the taxpayers, it's a huge differential. So we're spending a lot of money in this county, besides the fact that when someone commits suicide or die in jail, there's already been over $20 million paid out in civil suits since Sheriff Gord became sheriff in 2009. And you know, the civil suits continue. There was just one $3 million last week from a 2017 case. So, I mean, I think as citizens we should be concerned about that piece as well, as where's our taxpayer money going, and could it be used for resources in the community?
Yes.
Yes.
Robin, was there any action, you know, for this committee as far as like the budget going forward, of supporting that budget reallocation, or emails, or like, is there something that we can put as sort of an action recommendation for action items here?
Usually in March is when the county starts working on their budget, and that's when they put forth board, they call them board letters, that they recommend an amount of money being allocated. So I think what we can do is support that. You know, if people agree to do that we support there's an allocation of money for the resources in the community-based resources and treatment facilities, you know, so that people can get immediate help. I think that's what we can do. One thing I really liked, I just wanted to say a minute, is that, and I don't know if we do this here, so if I'm behind them, I apologize, but they had an equity impact statement for everything that went before the board today. And I think that's a great idea. They specifically focus on, you know, they had a little history, and they said traditionally in San Diego, you know, X% of Black people are, you know, are targeted for or are incarcerated, as opposed to this percent of the population. And this is why we're looking at it, because of the inequities in the system. And I thought that was an awesome idea.
You know, I think with regards to the MCRT, possibly some of the things that we can have our hands involved in is influencing the release of data in a timely manner. I think it's important that the city knows how the service is being used, if the service is being used here. It's an extremely worthwhile tool, and my biggest fear is that lack of data with their, the things that you rolled out there. I was just flipping from my notes with Spencer Katz back in January. July, the same questions that we had in July, we're still looking for answers in mid-October. And to me, that's extremely troubling. This is a countywide project that they should have some of these answers for, the data piece, the MOU piece. And I understand that the MOUs take a little while because, you are dealing with a number of agencies. But, the fact that cities don't know exactly what's going on, we don't have a true count of how the service is being used, if it's being used. I find that a little bit alarming. And I think, if from the city's perspective, we could, kind of push them a little bit to get at it, I think that it would kind of light a little bit of a fire under them. Because I think for the most part, nobody knows about this program. So they are being given the cover of, of people not knowing. So they're kind of dragging their feet. But I think if people were more aware of the existence of this thing, I think there'd be a little bit more urgency. I think that's the key. There doesn't seem to be a sense of urgency with regards to getting this thing out.
Yeah.
And my fear is, year one, we may get by. Year two, they're going to start looking at cutting things. And all of a sudden, we don't have any data, we don't have this, we don't have that. They'll cut it.
Easy to cut it at that
Yep.
point.
I don't
Okay.
think you can do education of the public either without data, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah, I think that's a good point, to push for that.
They keep saying they have $600,000 to do PR, but we have not seen one thing happen. Nobody knows about the North County Coastal, we know about it.
What's the difference between MCRT and PERT again?
What's the difference?
Yeah.
So,
Okay, go ahead.
So PERT is run specifically by the Sheriff's Department. And what happens when a PERT call happens is you have an armed deputy and a mental health clinician that show up on scene. MCRT, it's clinicians. And the thing is, what they found up in Eugene was when you send an armed deputy to a situation that's a nonviolent situation where a person is in a mental health crisis, the chances that the presence of that armed deputy calming the situation down is next to none. So it just kind of exacerbates the situation. So with the MCRT approach, it's a matter of treating the situation that's causing the crisis.
Right, yeah.
Be it the person's hungry, be it the person's cold, be it,
Well, that question that you asked of when it goes to 911, what percentage are going to MCRT instead of PERT, that is a really important question.
It's gonna be important when that, so I think if, we all have to keep pushing, and we can push, and maybe this is where, you, Catherine, and Kelly can help with Solana Beach and Del Mar, and, we heard, I don't know where I heard this, that there was, I think from Megan, the manager of the MCRT pilot, that they were doing some kind of pilot with the Carlsbad Police Department. But I never followed up and I never heard more, but it would be good to know whether they actually integrated the 911 into that.
Well, let's turn it back so that Nicole can do all the rest of the things on our agenda. Thank you so much for the update.
And I captured a couple of those things for when we get to the draft action items that we might want to include those.
Okay, and before we move on, just tomorrow night is our next council meeting, and we actually do have somebody from Exodus who runs this program who will be presenting to us.
Megan, yeah.
Megan, yeah. So if you would like to, you can provide comment on an informational item. And so if you would like to ask some of those more critical questions about data on a city-by-city basis, you can suggest that would be helpful for us.
Is it going to be at the beginning of the city council meeting?
Yes.
Very beginning.
Yes.
But she's good, and she now they've been running since January 11th is when they started the pilot. So they do get, we do have data about the calls, Captain Taft presented it. We got more updated information after that. But it would be good to hear what's going right now for them and what they see they can improve on and how it's working with, if Carlsbad does have, if they did something with Carlsbad to find that out.
Yeah. Just one last question. So did it seem like it was more integrated between the county and the county sheriff to do this type of training that they've contracted for than another police department?
This is how I look at it. So Pert is a not-for-profit. It's not part of the sheriff's department. It's an organization. They get a lot of money from the county, from the sheriff to run this. So one of our concerns was, is there a bias on the part of dispatchers to direct calls to Pert as opposed to the MCRT? That's going to be really something to see and evaluate, because if the dispatchers aren't trained or are police officers, one thing that there's a professor at UCSD who's also part of another coalition group here, he's part of the CPP process, which is the oversight for the city of San Diego, the police oversight. He said a lot of the dispatchers are rookie police officers looking to make extra money. So when you think about that, there might be some bias. I'm not saying there is, but there could be bias. That's why we were so concerned about training, is, are you training people to really look at the situation, or are they gonna have a favor towards the sheriff's department?
I see. Thank you.
And, last note on that, I think one thing that we have to be concerned about is the fact that if there's a gun in the home, the call is automatically gonna get kicked over to Pert. That's a problem, seeing that everybody owns a damn gun, so we have to be able to get these 911 operators to discriminate a little bit, ask critical questions. Does this person have access to the gun? Is the gun locked up? Because I just, that's the part that's the biggest concern for me, is with so many guns being out there,
Sure.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
All right.
Keep us cranking along.
Thank you, Rob.
This was an adjustment to the agenda last week. The discussion about the school district's former agenda item, which I know got pulled at the last minute, but I think, Councilmember Hinsey, did you want to kind of kick us off?
Yeah, so we were approached, the council, by several different community members who were really concerned that the school district had agendized this ban on critical race theory. And so, we paid attention to it, tuned into the board meeting, and at the very beginning of the board meeting, one of the board members, Board Member Ullman, moved to actually remove the item from the agenda. And his reason for that was, one, that critical race theory is not taught in our schools at that level. It's a graduate level study concept. And that, secondly, there were a lot of folks who really voiced their concern about prohibiting speech about race in our classrooms, because it's a really important topic for kids to be able to discuss. And then with the support of 2 of the other board members, the board only has 4 of its 5 members in place right now, they moved to remove that item and asked that it not come back. So that's where it stood. So it was removed, and the students who were serving for the very first time, I believe, they were just newly appointed this year, they also supported removing the agenda item. So they were vocal and said that they did not support a ban on critical race theory in school.
Who was the one?
Well, Mo acquiesced, but she was the one who had requested that it come back as a ban, as part of this policy on controversial topics.
So it was unanimous for,
Yeah,
okay.
they didn't actually take a vote, there was just consensus to remove it.
Oh, that's awful big of them. But, it's an important discussion item, because like you said, Kelly, you know, you have to be able to talk about matters of race, and in a school setting, you have to be able to talk about history. And you know, I think the path that a number of districts around the country are going down is cherry picking which pieces of history you want to talk about, because, you know, what do? You go from Plymouth Rock to George Washington to Abraham Lincoln to Martin Luther King to Barack Obama, and you know, you just pick those highlights without getting into the nuance and the all pieces and parts that were involved. So I feel like I can't believe that I'm going to say this, but the fact that, you know, Mike Allman, you know, acknowledged that critical race theory is not being taught in school is the proper assessment. It is not being taught in schools.
It's misunderstood.
Exactly.
It's a politicized term right now.
It's become a dog whistle, and I absolutely hate the use of the term, because people don't really know what it is. You know, they hear this thing and it takes them to a place that they don't understand it. You know, it scares them, and you know, and it creates unnecessary angst and drama that we saw over the last couple of weeks with this, you know, potential, you know, situation popping up at the high school district. So I'm glad they struck it down, and you know, hopefully we can move on beyond that and you know, have adult conversations.
It's an excellent podcast called South Lake. Has anybody heard it? You have.
I have not heard it, but
I highly recommend it because it shows the evolution of how one district in Texas is just a suburb of Dallas, where they had a very small black and brown population, and everybody loves this town, small. They had excellent schools like Encinitas, and how this seeped in because some of the students started saying, yes, we've been aggressed against, we've been bullied because of our race, or, you know, LGBTQ people, whatever. And how then outsiders brought in the idea of critical race theory and the buzzword about CRT, and how it exploded in the community and turned the community against each other. It's very good. It was done by NBC News, actually, so you could get it on Apple Podcast.
Robin, I didn't hear the name of the
South
podcast.
Lake.
South
yeah.
Lake.
So
Okay.
that's the name of the town in Texas.
You can find it on Apple Podcasts or any place where you find your typical podcast.
Exactly. I sound like a commercial, but it's very good.
So any follow-up needed or related conversation relative to that one from the committee's perspective?
I would just say that I was shocked to read about that it was even happening here, and I just felt like it underscored the importance of this committee being in existence for our community to have a resource to, you know, discuss it and just get it out there that, you know, we need to hear what the community has to say, but at the same time, that small voices don't overwhelm perhaps the majority with regards to their opinion to change equity and inclusiveness in our community.
Yeah, I think it's probably good on the.
I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
What is the relationship of the city with the school district? I mean, I know it runs independently, the school districts, both elementary and San Diego, but is there any direct relationship that has to do with land? I mean, is there any kind of connection or leverage that the city can?
I mean, it's an interestingly fraught question because we've recently had the school district weigh in on our city's decision. and we don't typically run things by the school district, like, do we offer senior lunches at our senior center? That's not a decision of programming that we would run by the school district. And it really, you know, it's county funded, so it's like multiple things are happening. I mean, I know there's a school district liaison committee, and we do a lot of communicating to the school district and with the school districts, but I don't know if you want to answer that.
Sure.
She's on that committee.
So 2 council members, it's myself and Councilmember Mosca, we serve as the liaisons on that committee. And it is all the schools, public schools in the city of Encinitas, including Maricosta, that meet together every other month, and we have representation both at the staff level and at the elected level. So we, you know, Marlon, as a USD board member, he attends regularly, his colleague on a USD attends regularly. And so we've got a lot of representation from the electeds. And I would say that in this period of transition for San Diego Union High School District, there's not quite the attendeeship of the board members to be coming to these meetings and talking about these topics. So in the wake of George Floyd's murder in 2020, we added a standing item that was to discuss topics of equity and efforts to expand the discussion within all of the schools. And we've had a lot of engagement from Maricosta. They appointed one of their students to come and attend our meetings and weigh in. And it, you know, sometimes was heated, but it was a conversation that needed to be had. So it was really nice to have that forum. And I think that sort of gave us the basis to lead into this committee, because it was such a valuable conversation for all of us to have.
So some of the touch points between the city and school, like safe routes to school, you know, crossing guard type things, any construction, you know, that's happening around the schools that's going to impact schools, you know, those are also some of those touch points. But
Yeah, I mean, I was on the school district liaison committee when I was first elected, and I would describe it as sleepy. Like, that was my experience.
Sleepy?
Yeah. So there, you know, every school district would go around and explain, you know, like a lot of jargon and like kind of PR stuff and everything. And, you know, there's a point of like maybe
More information sharing than anything.
I wouldn't call it sleepy anymore.
Yeah. So it's been somewhat transformed given
Yeah.
current events, you know, but that's that was how it was. But and I would say attendance was like at 50%. I mean, when it came to who would come.
Yeah, it was sort of like the e-bike discussion really got things going in the first place, to have people weighing in. And you know, it's great when we receive emails from a principal who's asking us to support them with more education and resources, which is something that we can do as a city. So yeah, e-bikes and equity are the 2 hot topics.
Thanks.
Moving on.
This is not the e-bike.
E-bikes is a 4-letter word. All right, so the next agenda item is kind of refocusing on this community engagement focus area, which was part of what last month was, you know, we're hoping to revisit kind of within a updated context. So there was really 2 kind of pieces of it. The first one being this idea of, are there any recommendations regarding the recruitment for improving diversity on boards, commissions, and council. So I wanted to start there. The second one is that broader question around, we want to make Encinitas more diverse and more welcoming. And this is from back like our very first meetings, that this was where we wanted to come back to. So before we get to that though, I think I want to land us here to start with, and maybe start the conversation there, and just kind of open that up to the community, or to the committee.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is an issue. Like, we should really think about what we want to recommend to the city to try to create a pipeline that's more formalized, so that we can have, I think if we're just going to leave it to like individual people to say, who do you know who's Latino, or who do you know, it's just not really organically being created that we have diversity. I mean, even honestly, like, I spent a lot of time trying to make sure our commissions have women on them. Like, you know, our planning commission was all men for a while, and so, you know, having our commissions reflect the demographics of our city is important. and our council, who want, you know, there was a question when we appointed Joy, like, well, why didn't you appoint a person of color? And it's like, I don't think we had one applicant who was a person of color. Like, it wasn't, you know, so and the response was like, oh, I didn't realize you had to apply. You know, the person who was saying that wasn't deeply involved, but I do think of this as a question that we should try to come up with some suggestions for, because I think that it has to be something that's more formalized than we currently have, which is just like whoever happens to be looking over the city announcements. And I don't think just posting them more frequently in the same places or something is going to do anything. I think it has to be some type of a pipeline somehow.
You know, one of the things that we're doing at my company is, you know, when it comes to interview panels, we've come out with a guideline that there has to be a woman and a person of color on the interview panels. I think in this situation, I think we should go with something where there has to be a woman or a person of color on any of these commissions or councils that are established. Given the, you know, paucity of people of color in, you know, Encinitas, to say that you're going to have a woman and a person of color is probably a little bit of a stretch at times. But to say either or, I think, you know, you start making a little bit of progress, because it is going to add a different voice to, you know, to some of those rooms. You know, it's going to add a different voice at the table that we probably currently don't have in a number of these, you know, formal gatherings.
Yeah, I mean, having like a mandate like that would drive, you know, it would drive a different decision making. Because it's like you would be looking for a spot, and in some ways that's like affirmative action, which I think is, I mean, maybe is a good suggestion. I don't know what you all think, but it would actually create a specific spot, and in some ways it's not that hard to accomplish.
No.
It's not asking a lot to say on each commission to have at least one woman or one person of color.
Yeah.
But only if decision making is by consensus. If you have a majority, then traditionally women and people of color will not be necessarily counted in their opinions. I was on the interview panel as a union steward with Kaiser for 9 years. I was the steward, so I had a seat at the table. We used to do things by majority, and if we had a gut feeling that the therapist we're hiring wasn't going to work out, it was basically discounted because of the majority rule. When we changed things and started doing decision by consensus, we had excellent outcomes. I'll have to say it really changed. But if you only have one woman or one person of color and everybody else is white and male, you know, you're going to have, and they're going to prevail.
Well,
and they don't have the same sensibility of the community.
I mean, I think you know, the way government works is that you get to vote on stuff, and like you get to say yay or nay. So, and the way commission appointments work is the mayor recommends and the council approves. So I don't really see those two things changing. I think I spent almost 4 years on a commission, and a lot of it does become consensus driven, where people are groups naturally want to find consensus, like that's human nature. Yeah. So it's like, you know, what do you think, or what if we did it this way, or you know, they kind of move around in this way, and they meet only once a month. So except for planning commission, which meets twice a month. But you know, I do think that even just having, I mean, our city is 13% Latino, and we have like very little representation from that community on our commissions. Mm-hmm. And even like I was at Dia de los Muertos, like talking to the woman, you know, who's dressed up in this amazing costume, like, would you apply for the Parks and Rec Commission? Because we do programming, and I'm like we're standing backstage, you know, right before we're about to go on. She's like, okay.
Here's the application.
Yes, that's good for that. But it's like, from there what happens? Like, you know, it's like, it doesn't work out.
Sometimes people need help filling out the applications. It has to be language sensitive. It has to be you know, if you have meetings during the day, people who are working just can't come, and so then you already eliminate most of the population who work 2 or 3 jobs in the Latino community to survive.
Yeah.
So how do you mitigate that, those things? that are
I don't
barriers?
think there's a perfect solution out there, but I think, you know, to start somewhere is better. You know, we're not trying to hit a home run right off the top.
No.
You know, I think just by making the mandate thing a reality gives us a start. I think additionally, you know, does the city currently keep track or have any metrics to support or show who's applied for any of these council positions or commission positions? To see, you know, so we can track along.
Well, that's a good
you
idea,
know.
like to actually track the data. I mean, even if when you apply for the commission, the application is extremely short. It's like half a page and then attach your resume. So it's like, you know, you could ask for race or ethnicity there, and then we could start tracking that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I believe ultimately
Data
these
is
commissions
matter.
should look like the city.
Yeah, they
They
should,
should
yeah.
represent what the city looks like. And the only way we can get there is through data and understanding what we're dealing with.
Well, I think that, the mayor's point that you met, I'm forgetting her name, not Beatrice.
It might be Beatrice, yeah.
At this event, Dia de los Muertos, that's really one of our only events that we highlight this community that has the second most prevalence in our community aside from those who are white. And I do think that there's value to the city having more events and more partnerships with organizations that specifically raise up the voices of people of color within our community. So it's like every time I go to E4E, I'm like, I've never seen this much diversity in my city as I'm seeing right here. And it's because there's this intentional focus to bring people from other cities here and to, you know, redefine what it is that we want to see here in our city. In your State of the Speech address, it really hit me when you said the need to intentionally diversify. Like that should be across all of our departments, that there is some stated value that department has the mandate to intentionally diversify their programming or, you know, whatever it is of their specific focus.
Well, and you know where that came from? Like, my thought process on intentionally diversifying was the recognition when I saw those racial covenant deeds that transferred property to the Carter School District that intentionally created segregation by saying this could only be used, sold, leased by someone of the white or Caucasian race. And I thought, this was intentionally creating groups that are only white. And so in order to change that, you can't just expect they're gonna be, that's gonna change organically. So it's like, we have to intentionally create the diversity to right that previous wrong. And like, it's that was that awareness of it, and I do, it applies to this too. Yeah.
And you know, and I think some of the other, you know, you talk about some of the events that happen in the city. You know, at some point, I imagine the street fair or whatever that thing is that happens down on the 101 is gonna come back to life. You know, you know, woman-owned, people of color, you know, owned vendors. You know, let's come up with a number or a percentage of vendors that are, you know, participating in this thing. You know, that way, again, you're exposing people, you know, in a not so, you know, over the top way. You know, it's just kind of organic, it's kind of natural that you're, you know, having additional vendors there, or vendors that, you know, offer something a little different, you know, a little bit more diversity to the event than what we normally have. So
Does the city run the street fair?
We don't run the street fair, but the concept that Robin brought up to have an equity lens on everything that the council approves would be really helpful in that circumstance, because we do have to approve their major use permit for that event, their event permit. And so having something like, what's the equity impact statement along with this event?
That's
would be
what I-
helpful.
yeah.
And this is very similar to like when Sandag does contracting and they say there has to be a certain percentage that is, there's an acronym. It's like woman.
small business, woman-owned,
Yeah.
veteran, people of color.
Yeah, I don't forget what the acronym is, but they use it a lot. And it's like, how are we doing on that metric? And the labor leaders will say, like, you know, are you following it exactly, are you doing it the wrong way, are you fudging, or, you know, they ask these questions, which is good. But it's the same idea, which would be a good thing, like, for our events. I mean, in the same way, I think back to a lot of times to, like, our shift around a lot of environmental things, where it's like, we're having events on our city property, you cannot hand out plastic water bottles, you can't have these disposable, like, all these tchotchkes and all this kind of ridiculous stuff just go straight into the trash. Like, we have a policy about that. And in some ways, you know, this is the same idea. It's like, well, it's intentionally creating a different outcome.
Right. And it gets back to being more welcoming community, right? That's where the city
Right.
can have some influence on it, so, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and I think these are the types of actions that we can really drive an influence from, you know, sitting here. And I'm in love with the equity impact statement. That, you know, that's kind of awesome.
I mean, and I think this might go to your question number 2, because I was thinking about how do we remedies for this? Because the equity impact statement, this goes back to one of these first conversations we had, where one of our most difficult things is talking about housing, and who would live in high density housing, and what is the percentage, and does it look different from who lives in single family housing? To me, that's a question I still don't feel like we have an answer to, or that anybody on staff is working on, or that was embraced by this committee. And I do think that if that would be really useful to see, that you would, I think you probably would have higher percentage of minorities and seniors at a minimum. And those are 2 categories who need housing.
Yeah.
So, but we're not, you know, none of the proposals that come to us ever have data about who would live in these places, who would live in apartments.
Yeah, I
Really? They
think
don't
that-
have to submit that when they're, really?
No, they have to do like, a pro forma. Well, they have to provide information on, yeah, there's no demographic information on who would live in them. And I know there was like a concern that maybe it would just basically show there's no difference. Like, it would just basically show that it was just white people anyway, who were rich. But I don't know if that's true. Like, I don't know if that's really true.
Yeah, I think one of the concerns was how would that information be used? That was one of the legal things, is if it shows that there's no difference, is that gonna skew versus it's just, like, it can't be a reason to vote for or against a project, but how would that do? But next month for housing, we can dig back into that a little bit, because I've heard that from you a couple times, so.
Well, and I mean, under fair housing laws, like, the developer can't propose to do like only one bedrooms, because families can't live in one bedroom, so it's discriminating against families. So, you know, it does seem like there's a way to have data like that doesn't necessarily skew one way or the other. It's just,
Yeah, in this last project that was before us, the Goodson project in the city of Encinitas, it went to planning commission with a certain recommendation, and I think it was due to the work of the planning commission that they realized there was this oversight, and that all the low income rental units only had 1 bedroom, or was what do they call it, a junior 1 bedroom,
Yeah.
something like that. And so I think, you know, there's so much information that our staff is processing, but calling it out and saying, you know, separately, here's the paragraph on equity, makes it a lot easier for folks on the outside to look in at it and say, that's not totally right, so that it doesn't come to the planning commission with an oversight like that.
How would we capture that as a possible recommendation, like
I think that's already gonna happen. I think that just happened in that case. But you think it was like a systemic problem with that?
Yeah, I feel that it is, yeah, I do. And I think it's because, you know, sort of there's this division of responsibility right now where the city can help to an extent by keeping a list of people who are interested in affordable housing, but it you know, is it the developer's role to do it? And currently it's the developer's role to do it. The city, you know, so it's sort of like this pass off that isn't really clear and not very transparent about the city's making sure that this is part of it, but then it gets passed over, and what's the actual result of it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if you've been following this sports arena, you know, redevelopment that they're going to do in San Diego. And I was reading that now one of the developers who was in the original round and then they pulled out, now they're proposing low, moderate, and high affordability apartments and homes in this development. And I like that, they have a mix, you know, I don't know how it's gonna look, and it's gonna be multi-use, mixed-use kind of thing with stores and stuff like that. But I think that's a great model, is that you have some of each in equal numbers. I mean, because the low and moderately low housing will address a lot of people who live in our community already, who can't afford, you know, getting priced out of their houses or their apartments.
And you know, and I think a lot of cities across the country are doing things similar to that, where you're weaving in low-income housing with, you know, middle class, upper middle class housing. That way, you know, you're not putting these people out onto an island, you know, where it's just all low income, where there's no revenue being generated from this community, and the schools continue to suffer. You know, the area that I grew up in St. Louis, that was what it was, you know, where, you know.
Well, this is the RENA process. I mean, the RENA process, it says every city has to provide a certain amount of housing that's available to low-income people, is saying, we're not gonna concentrate poverty, we're gonna have housing throughout, and also state laws recently changed where even within a project, the low-income units can't be just in their own wing, like their own floor with no pool and no storage closets.
Exactly.
They have to use the same entrance, they have to be integrated in, which is really good.
Yeah.
Because then, you know, no one knows who's who in the zoo. You know, you're just looked at as people instead of, oh, those are the people in the, you know, in the Section 8 housing. You know.
I grew up in a development, apartments in Queens, New York, that was right on the border. It was as far as away you can get from Manhattan, because we were on the very border. But I didn't know until maybe 10 years ago that it was subsidized housing. And it was for GIs, and it was all white, and it was all Jewish. The whole thing, there was 99% Jewish. But I didn't know because it was so homogenous. So you really didn't know what kind of development you lived in. You know, people there were not, we were sort of on the, you know, working class people. But it's interesting.
Councilmember Hinsey, I want to come back to you, and then Ross. Just on the housing item, that as it goes through to the planning commission, was there a recommendation for a separate section on a staff report, or?
Yeah, like an equity impact statement.
Okay.
That, you know, for planning commission especially, that's going to probably be a very long statement and a very deep analysis, and breaking that out from the rest of the things, so that, you know, whenever we have something come to us, we have the climate action plan implications of that project. There should also be the equity impact implications of the project.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, and that's one that next month when we do deeper dive into housing, that might be one to talk through with them of what might be components in that. Because if I was a staff member and I said, like, equity impact statement for this housing project, what are you,
well, so
like, maybe putting some meat around that?
I just reviewed, so when Jennifer Gates presented to us a couple meetings ago, there was so much information that it was a little bit like, all right, there's a lot of information.
Yeah.
But taking a look at those bullet points of what our next cycle of housing entails, it's that we've completed a study by December 2022 to understand it more in depth, these questions of what equity looks like in Encinitas. And so once these studies are complete, I think we'll have more data for our staff to use that are particular to our projects. Instead of having, you know, they look at the state level, they look at the federal level, but recommendations specific to Encinitas, and answering the question, does this diversify our city? Yes, and in this way. Have we consulted with the local housing groups that, like Encinitas for Equality's housing group that is developing this really great formula for if they consider a project equitable or not? They haven't made any recommendations with that equation yet, because I think they're still devising it, but I would want to know that. I would want to know how a project scores on that evaluation.
If something like an equity impact statement were to come to fruition, is there a mechanism in place that could make it I don't want to say a forever thing, but to make it to where the next administration that comes in can't just say, you know what, we're done with this and we're going to go back to the way it was?
I mean, I don't think so, but I also think that if we can get something started, the hard work is like conceiving of it and figuring out how to who's writing it on the staff, like, once we get that going, it seems, I think that it's one of those things that there'll be a culture created around it.
Yes.
So, yeah, but yeah, I mean, things can change, but the reality is most things don't change much. They stay the same as they've been going, especially when there's a whole bureaucracy that's doing it in a certain way. So this, these suggestions, I'm having a hard time following them as they've written down, but I do think it's good that you're writing them down. Because
Is it the handwriting?
But also because I want to make sure that this committee formally recommends to the council some things that we recommend that the council do, so the council can fund it or direct city manager to operationalize it.
Right.
Because otherwise, I mean, it shouldn't be written in such a way that it's like continue to push for data. Like, I understand that's for the MCRT, but we should say, no, we want specific data of applicants on commission so that we can have that information provided annually to the electeds and the public to see who is applying for commissions and understand if we do have a pipeline problem and how we can change that.
I wanted to go back to the first few bullet points about the recruitment, right, for the council and commissions, and it needs more fleshing out, doesn't it, right? So who would own, for example, what if nobody applies, that's a woman or a person of color? Does the seat stay open?
Well, this is one of those things which in some ways, I think it's a greater good to have diversity that reflects our community, and so we would be tying our own hands in some ways. Like, because I make the recommendation to council, but I would like to have my hands tied to say that we would have to go back out. Like, if you don't have any, or if I don't want to recommend the one person who has applied, we would open the recruitment again and go back out. And if it becomes a big enough problem, then we would need to say to the city staff that we need to have someone on staff who's in charge of recruitment.
Right.
Like who's somehow spending more time at this. Yeah, because essentially what happens now is the city clerk posts it.
Right.
And then there might be like our PIO puts it on Facebook, or maybe not. And then a lot of times it's like, we'll encourage people to apply, and at the end, sometimes 3 people flood in at the end or something. But it's not, we usually do have good quality of applicants, and sometimes it's really hard because there are multiple good people. But making sure that the outcome is diverse, at least somewhat, is a good.
Right, which also requires that meaning the incoming is diverse, right? So you have a diverse slate of candidates.
Right.
So,
If I'd like to address that some as well. I've actually started an equity training through the Leadership Fellowship Council, I think it's called, and they have like what they call board listings. So it's mpboard.com, I think it is, or .org, or mpboardexchange.org. And basically, and I checked with them, they are allowing, like, if you want to advertise city commissions, that you could advertise that on this, it's like a job board basically, and it's only for San Diego County. So that might be another resource that we could consider. I have learned through the training, it's 3 modules, and I've just completed my first one, and they're all nonprofit leaders of various organizations in San Diego County, and it is a common thread issue of finding those candidates when they're doing the searching. So I'm going to see if there are other resources here locally that we might consider when we have an open position for either a commission or a city council position, that we really work on promoting it through as many channels as possible. Another avenue that I thought that we could use is, this is the quarterly Parks and Recreation magazine that everyone in the city of Encinitas gets. It's delivered as a postal customer, which means it goes to residents and businesses. Currently, most of it is just Parks and Rec information, but Tony Krantz and I have talked about the idea of actually making this like a more of a city publication. That yes, there's lots of Parks and Rec information in here, but you know, as you see here, there's some advertising about the organics, and I know on one of these issues they also talked about mobility. They had a mobility section here. So the idea of expanding this as a channel where we could reach every resident, and I used to do direct mail as my career, so I know that we can make this bigger with no increase really in the cost for the postage itself. It's only the additional few pages that it's going to cost for the printing of the publication. So it's a cost-effective way to be able to go out and reach the entire city, where we might be able to put in messages about placement for these commissions, as well as other important city notices, you know, whether it's redistricting or you know, any of the multiple things that end up kind of coming up. But I feel like we can take something that's already established, that we already have a budget for to a certain extent, and then just kind of build on it. So I feel like we can get the message out a lot in that way as well. I've also seen that there's been some signage recently where they use flashing street signs that they use for construction purposes, and you're using it right now to advertise the redistricting workshops on El Camino Real. So, you know, that's another, it's a resource that we have. If you don't need it for a construction zone, great, you know, maybe there's something that we can do there as well. So I just, those are a couple things that I thought were low-hanging fruit that we could use as communication channels to try to reach out to diversify our commissions and councils while still being somewhat cost-effective.
Do they, I mean, I know you received it, it's a beautiful publication, but they're not in Spanish. So how do you reach out to the Latino population? Do you give them to the schools stuff in the backpacks, or not that anybody looks in their kids' backpacks, but you know what I'm saying? How do you get that information to the population you want to recruit? You send it to them in English, no one's going to read them, and some people are illiterate, so they're not going to read them either. But what other ways? I mean, you're using social media. Everybody has a phone now. You know, people have.
But everything that's in social media and Instagram or Facebook, I mean, that's all in English.
No, it doesn't have to be though. That's what I'm saying.
Right,
Yeah.
which is one of your other recommendations already, is to work on, not on this slide,
Right.
but on the draft recommendations, that one about language and accessibility. That's under community engagement, because it crosses into housing, but you also wanted it specific to conversations like
And
this.
you know, and I think with publications like that, maybe on, you know, the inside of the first page, we could say, hey, you know, the Spanish Spanish version of this document is located at www. whatever. You know, again, you know, it's, there's no perfect solution, you know, but I think if you know, I think from a cost effective, you know, manner, seeing that 90% of the community,
Yeah.
you know.
And some of it too, remember, the how might come later. You know, the higher level recommendation, and then the how is it executed might be later.
The other thing too in this training that I've been taking is that equity is a journey. We can't just jump ahead and be at utopia immediately. You know, it's going to take some time. It's incremental steps, and I feel like as long as we start moving towards the direction, and we try to pick up as much as we can as we go, then that's great. You know, I don't feel like there's always going to be an end point.
I agree.
But we're talking about intentionality.
Yes.
And that's what we're really focusing on. What can we recommend as a group here that is intentionally going to create avenues for diversity to happen?
Right.
It can't be just, oh, well, you know, I hear what you're saying. I agree with you 100%. Nothing happens immediately. But that's something that actually can be explored immediately. So why not
Yep.
say, how do you do that, right?
So the conversation from the last meeting, which started at the meeting prior to it, was about if we wanted to engage with groups in the community for input. So it was specific to this item in terms of if one of the goals of the committee is to create a more welcoming and diverse community, do we need additional information from groups in the community? And that was where we started generating, we have a 2-question list and kind of that list of groups, and then we kind of push pause on that to come back this month. So I don't want to shortcut the conversation. I feel like we've got some recommendations under recruitment, that we've got a couple that we can pull forward for that. But in addition to direct question, do we want to keep talking about additional ideas for making Encinitas more welcoming and diverse, or do we want to shift the focus to, do we want to engage some of these community groups, and then if so, how?
Because I don't answer that question, because we spent a long time around that question last time.
On a survey
Yeah.
to go to.
Yeah. So the kind of 3 sort of next steps under that, if we're gonna do some sort of community engagement, who's possible to talk to? Who do we want to talk to first, and then what do we want to ask them? So that was the kind of piece here. So this was the list from the last one. That was the kind of brainstorm list. So I would say maybe start with what groups aren't on there, if there's any that should be listed. And remember, this might be for this committee to engage with, or this might be a list as the housing studies, the race equity and the affordability studies move forward in the next 2 years, that we say, here's kind of a composite list of groups that should at least know about these processes and these meetings. So I think first one would be, who are we missing from this, or who would need to be added for potential community groups for engagement around a conversation about becoming more diverse and more inclusive.
I don't understand the first point. Since clergy, and they have food banks and C&D, what does that mean?
So I believe that was Joni's point of input last time, that there were certain groups that were working with those.
Like some of the churches also do food banks.
Oh, is that what you meant?
Mhm.
Okay.
I was going to suggest the Main Street organizations and the Encinitas Chamber of Commerce. And I'm not exactly in great understanding on some of the abbreviations in the groups under schools, but I also just kind of feel, particularly considering what most recently happened, that maybe reaching out to the school boards or PTAs or more, just to try to, I think it would be great for us just to kind of get a pulse for, what are people thinking in those leadership positions with regards to equity.
And I would say any church or any religious organization in Encinitas that serves the Spanish-speaking population. And there are quite a number of churches here who have Spanish services, Spanish language services. I don't think we have any health organizations. Like Scripps. I mean, that would be, obviously, we should reach out to them. They serve many people in the community. And also, what's Smart County Health Services called now?
True Care.
What?
True Care.
True Care. So I would say that as well. Because they probably have community outreach programs.
Yeah.
Is it TRUE?
It is,
TR.
yeah.
This isn't necessarily a community group, but as I was kind of looking at other cities on the internet to see what their equity committees are doing, I was noticing, like in Santa Clara, they had a nice web presence for their equity committee, and I feel like ours is lost. I mean, you have to go through 5 submenus to even get to the equity committee for us. And on this website, they would have a community listening session survey, so that that you could actually go through, and there's a survey, and if you're interested in taking a look at it, it's not real long. It's 10 questions. Some of them are a 1 to 10 scale. Other things are free form that you can write in. But it's an opportunity for the community to actually say something. You know, you don't have to be one of these organizations. So if you're a student, or if you're a senior, or whatever, you could fill out this survey and make your thoughts known. And I feel like this is something that could be advertised through the city emails that they send out, or in other areas with a QR code, or you know, maybe things that the youth commission might suggest with regards to getting out to young people. But I like the idea that they had that on their diversity, equity, and inclusion page that the city had. And in addition to that, they had another section where it was just share your thoughts. Send us an email, and they had Equity Task Force at santaclaraca.gov, so that if they just wanted to share their thoughts, that would be another way of doing it. So I feel like you know, providing that opportunity could be worthwhile and insightful for us as well, as long as people know that it's there to offer their opinion.
I love those ideas. You know, at work we host listening sessions to have employees come in and talk to our executives, and you know, they are always extremely beneficial. They, you know, always give us great ideas and, you know, great insights as to where we need to go with it. And I think us possibly, you know, towards the end of this, maybe, you know, hosting a listening session where we just sit and listen to what the community, you know, we've talked about what we think the community wants, or, you know, or people that we should probably talk to. But I love the idea of just sitting back and listening to hear people, you know, what they have to say. What are their thoughts on these things, you know? The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Are these focus groups, Marla, or more? You're saying listening sessions?
Listening sessions.
So different than our focus group?
Right, not necessarily asking questions to get.
No,
Yeah.
just listening. You know, it's almost just a one-way communication.
Would you send the example of the survey to the group?
I'd be happy to.
Because when I see this list, what I see is almost like a carbon copy of the task force that we've formed for our homeless action plan working group, who will convene, and they'll be discussing a lot of these issues. And so maybe something as simple as a survey will help us figure out what it is we're going to be asking of these different organizations and members of our city. And I think something that was really powerful for me was, you know, when folks were gathering at the Kook to have these Black Lives Matter rallies, so many students were approaching me and the other people who were there to tell us about their experiences of what it's like to be a person of color in Encinitas. And up until that point, I had kind of been blind to it, like, oh yeah, everything's good, and, you know, we have this and that. And it was hearing from them that made me feel like, oh, we have a problem here that we need to be working on head on. So the idea of a forum for people to come and say what they think, I don't know that we're going to get to the heart of the matter, because it's really hard to express these feelings in a big public setting. So something that the city's been doing, which I'm really encouraged about, is that they're going to the events, they're having a pop-up tent there. It's city staffers at the highest levels who are having people come and talk to them about their issues with the city. And it seems like it's been really productive so far. And so, you know, I think about Dia de los Muertos. Should the city be there with a presence, talking to people in the same way that we do for development services? Just meeting people where they're at, instead of like, here's another survey, here's another thing. Like, and being approachable in that way, I think would help us a lot. Just one more aspect of that thought. Maybe it'll come to me.
Yeah. Because, you know, I think ultimately it's important for people to know that, you know, while this committee is in existence, Encinitas is, you know, not this horrible place that some people, think that we think it is, And I think it's important to communicate that, I think the ability to be able to communicate that what we're trying to do here is to prevent anything from escalating and prevent, bad outcomes from happening. We recognize that there are things that have happened, that have occurred. But to bury our head in the sands and act as if they're one-off situations, is problematic.
So we're kind of moving in between the draft recommendations and this, so this is perfect, just in terms of time, kind of where we're at. If we kind of look at this list, and then if you can read my handwriting and see the marker, some of this list over here, if this committee were to intentionally engage with a couple of them, and we would need to refine the questions, are there some that you see as more of a starting point for kind of like, hey, let's, these might be sort of the fulcrum organizations that would be a good starting point to help us hone in on the question of how can we make Encinitas more welcoming and more diverse? So that's the purpose of the engagement.
I would say I'm already, I sent a communication to the North County LGBTQ Resource Center, and working on setting up a meeting with them, with the executive director to just kind of discuss what his thoughts are, and then also just to get any input that he might have that I may not be aware of, that I could bring to the committee. So I am expecting to meet with him the first week of November.
I would say, along with the North County LGBTQ, I'd say the CRC, because they give us access to some of our unhoused population. I would say the clergy.
Maybe schools. I would say
When we say
Schools.
clergy, though, that to me sounds like lots of people.
Well,
That-
we have our churches here. How many churches are in?
Maybe
in
faith-based
schools?
communities would be a better way to describe clergy.
Well, I just mean, if there's only 10 of you, are you going to actually be able to talk to the clergy? Or is it this, some communities there's like one that's more active or two or three that are.
Exactly. There are only a handful that are, legitimately active, doing stuff that we're.
But if we started with North County LGBTQ and CRC, is that a good?
Yeah.
I would say the schools, not the school board necessarily, but the Mcrt, ELAC, and DELA. I speak Spanish, I'd be happy to help with that.
And Joni seems to be really tied into those organizations
Yeah,
perhaps as
Joni,
well.
maybe.
I think she would be a great asset.
We could work together on that.
My feeling is that the most valuable thing is like what you're doing with the county, with MCRT, where you identify the thing that needs attention and focus, and you're asking questions, and you're kind of driving accountability. And so, the really broad-based, like, data gathering, to me seems less valuable than trying to, from people on this committee or these groups, to be really focused on a thing that we can do. That's why this list of these other things that we've come up with the commissions and stuff, it's applied in a way that seems like it might actually produce something.
Right.
So, and I feel the same way about the Homeless Action Committee, like these exact same groups, like she said, it's a carbon copy of the same, because basically this is all the institutions that are involved civically in any way.
Okay.
So it's like, reaching out to all of them in a very generalized way about the unsheltered, like where is that going? Like you've got to focus to some degree to say, are we trying to provide more help to this subset? Are we trying to provide this social service that we don't currently have, or something that drives that in some way?
Yeah, maybe the right step is for one of our members here to start attending the Homeless Action Plan working group and be the liaison between us and what they're saying there.
Is that an ongoing group, or is that temporal?
It's
for
just
the...
getting started, and I think that it will be ongoing until we solve homelessness.
So it'll be around for a bit.
For a bit, yeah.
That's a good idea, liaison. I myself don't think surveys are very useful. You only get about, if you get 20%, that's a lot, so it's not representative. When we did the E-Freeze survey, it wasn't representative of Encinitas. I don't think it was.
We got enough.
We got enough, but it's, I think the listening group that Marlon's talking about will be much more valuable.
Yeah.
The nice thing that surveys do provide is more privacy, and you're able to really communicate your thoughts and feelings without being in public.
Right.
If there was just a way to get people to really participate in it, though, that's the.
Okay.
Well, this is an interesting idea, in addition to having a presence at these community events and we have a booth there, is that we also have a couple iPads and we have this survey and we're reaching out to people and having them maybe doing it right there, when we're talking to them, so that, we might be able to get some input that way as well.
I do think the web page that you brought up is a really great idea, to have something there that's a little bit more robust. Like during COVID, I got so many calls from renters who are having issues with their landlords, and to find the number that the city contracts with, the nonprofit, was not easy to find. So if we have this sort of open-ended question of, how can we help you, that we could be responding to those requests in a way like, we already have that service available, here's just a quicker way to get at it.
Okay. So I do want to, just for the purposes of time, kind of get you where we've landed and what that would look like moving forward. So the questions that are up on the screen, these were ones from the last meeting that we started to say, like, if we engage, like if we go to CRC, what the heck do we want to ask them? And to the mayor's point, what's the productive conversation? Like what's really information that's going to help us move our needle or hone in on, like, ideally, what is a draft recommendation from the committee? So what do we learn from North County LGBTQ Center that says, like, oof, this is something the Equity Committee can recommend? So last time we had kind of talked about condensing the questions. It sounds like maybe, the more conversational approach might be at this point something that's acceptable. Is there interest in kind of honing that in so we're all asking the same 3 questions, or do you want to start just kind of the relationship-based model and see where that goes?
When you say relationship, you mean with these
Like
organizations?
you and Joni talking to Mcrt and ELAC and DLAC, and just saying, like,
Maybe we should start with the people, right? We narrow the list of the groups on red up there. Maybe it's getting some input from a few groups to help us hone in.
to start it. Okay.
Yeah.
So just kind of have some of those conversations. Okay. So we went through those. For next session, housing updates will be the big kind of bulk with Jennifer and Roy coming back. So Roy to talk about the communications process, Jennifer to dig in. She has a laundry list of items. The census numbers should be available by then. If there's any interest in a presentation on that, we can put that on there. And then we are at the 6-month mark for the committee. So if we want to put together some sort of update for council maybe in December, then we should use that next meeting to kind of hone in on, hey, here's kind of the midway update. Who wants to do it? I know you two are on the council, but it's probably a good thing for some of the members to come forward, even if it's just a one slide.
Yeah, and I think it would be cool at that point to deliver an item or two,
Or a recommendation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, well, you guys have a ton of recommendations. So,
But
not a ton,
these
but
ones we wrote down
you have
today
some,
too.
and
Yeah.
these, and we'll
Yeah.
include those,
And
I'll put that.
Make sure and tell the housing people about this thing about the
Yep.
housing so that we can get into that a little more detail.
Yep, yep.
I have to think of my kids, I'm sorry.
Okay. Don't apologize for that. Okay.
Nicole?
Yes, ma'am.
I was gonna recommend, if you want to see, maybe you can look, I don't know if you're willing to do this, just look on the county, on the board of supervisors, look up what they do for the equity impact statements.
I
Do you have access to that? Is
I
that something
just
you
looked-
could?
I was just looking for.
Could you send me a
I'll send
link
it
or
to you
something?
because
Yeah.
When I went in to look at the
Yeah.
agenda, the agenda's not already posted. They moved on, but it's really interesting. See you tomorrow? No,
Thursday.
Thursday.
Yeah, and I asked, 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 yeah, and I asked,